Welcome to the Relationship Series podcast. My name is Ankush Jain, and each episode I'll be speaking to a different state of mind expert on the subject of relationships. Enjoy. Welcome to episode 25 of the Relationship Series. This week I'm joined by Barb Aust, who has been involved in the education field for over 40 years. She's worked as a teacher, as a principal, and a mentor for school leaders and education and university students engaged in teacher education. I met Barb recently through a mutual friend who was also an expert in state of mind and referred me to Barb's new book, The Essential Curriculum, which we'll be talking about on this interview. And I reached out and met Barb, and I was straight away just thought I need to interview her for this series because she's got such a deep understanding around state of mind, and some of her stories around her own relationships was so impactful to me that I just needed to get her on. So I'm really happy that she's agreed to this interview and glad to have her join us. So welcome, Barb.
Thank you. Lovely to be with you today.
I'm really looking forward to this interview. And before we start, would you mind giving the audience a little bit about your background and how you got into state of mind and what your experience has been over the last few decades?
Okay. Well, I've been involved in the education field for over 4 decades. I started teaching when I was 19 years old. And I learned along the way that the teacher has a great deal to do with how things go in a classroom, and not just in terms of the curriculum that you're delivering, but in terms of the feeling. And that just deepened over the years. And I had 3 children of my own in that time, worked in preschool, worked in daycare, and then went back into the public school. And over that time, my understanding deepened because of connections that I made with other people along the way. And I began to see that my own state of mind as a teacher, or as a parent, or as a wife, or a friend, made a huge difference in how my relationships went. So over the years, that's just deepened into an understanding that it's my come from that makes a huge difference. And that has played itself out as I've been in a variety of different places in schools and everywhere in life. One of the things that I do now that I'm a retired person is I do a lot of volunteer work, and it's exactly the same thing. It's my state of mind. It's my come from. It's the place where I reside at home inside myself that makes a huge difference in all the relationships that I have. So where real estate people talk about location is really important in sales, I have to say that in life, relationship is where it's at. So that's what I've discovered over the years.
So when you say relationship, what do you mean by that? What's the most important element of successful relationships? Because I know that's something that I'm really interested in, and I know that the listeners are too. Well,
I think the most important thing of all is about where you're coming from yourself. Lots of times, and I know for myself way back in the past, I would blame another person if there was a breakdown in our relationship, and it would be all their fault. It's because they didn't do something, or because they said something. And I still slip into this now and then but it's more about how we deal with the situation and how we view it. And so much of it comes back to taking care of ourselves so that the way we view the world is from a more positive outlook.
Could you say more about that? Because I know a few years ago I was reading some self-development books, and certain people talk about looking after yourself first, and I even remember reading something that was talking about being selfish in order to help people. Is that what you mean, or are you pointing to something different?
No, I mean something quite different, and it's tricky, isn't it? Because the words sound like they're the same, but they're not. It's more a sense of taking responsibility for your view, of of knowing that if you're viewing the world in a way that's dark, that's coming from you and from your own thoughts, and that the thoughts in your mind are creating your feelings. So noticing, always noticing where you're at, what's your state of being in the world today. And if I get up on the wrong side of the bed and I'm seeing it from a pretty black place and I'm blaming my husband because he didn't take out the garbage or any number of different things, it's really not about him. It's really more about, wait a minute, how am I viewing the world? I could just say to him, hey, forgot to take the garbage out. Do you mind doing that? And then it would all be over. And I make the choice. I can choose to be stuck and be upset with him, or I can choose to find another way out of it. But that all resides in me. It's the choices that I make.
So is this really about, or have you found this to really be about communication?
Well, yeah, it's about communication, but it's deeper than that. It's about noticing and observing from a quieter state of mind where my come from is. And looking at that, I can make a choice, and I can project what I want into the world. So it's about communication, but there's a step before communication of taking responsibility for the place where you reside inside. And not in a harsh way, just noticing. Just noticing. If I'm crabby with my kids or my grandkids, is that about them or is that about me? Usually it's just about me. Sometimes it's about them too, but it's about the relationship we have in that day and how we're going to work through it. And yeah, you're right. It is communication, but there's a step before the communication.
Yeah, I really like that you said that in that way. It really puts a lot more responsibility on ourselves, but not in a heavy way. It sounds like it.
No, in a really neutral way. It becomes, what I've discovered is that it becomes much more interesting, and that instead of being upset with yourself for being in a low space or being pretty chuffed with yourself because you're in a great space, it's just noticing, oh, this is where I'm at today, and this is how I'm viewing the world. And so much of that comes from our own state of mind when we're in a calm place. And I guess that would be the thing that has been the greatest learning for me, is to slow it down and to not live in a state of frenzy all the time, because then I can observe it. I make better choices then.
Yeah, that's so true. I was talking to a client of mine, and I was just saying that similar sort of thing, that there's always our state of mind that's in play when we're having a communication problem with someone else. And whilst it looks like it to me, I'm wondering if it looks like that to you as well sometimes, that it really is the other person that is causing us to feel a certain way. And I find, for me, the more that I think it really is the other person, that's often the time that I really am not taking into account my own state of mind.
Yeah. I know I have a pretty powerful story to tell about that, and I'm sure my husband won't mind if I do tell it.
Well, we won't tell him, Bob. We'll keep it just between us.
Okay. I won't let him listen to this recording. In 25 years ago now, 1990, we had been married for maybe 23 years or 24 years at that time. And I was seeing the world from a totally different place, and he was the one that was wrong in all of it. He was dead wrong. And I was right. I was being very self-righteous about the whole thing. And I can kind of chuckle about it now, but at the time it was really serious. And we ended up separating after that length of time. Our children were grown and had left, and we separated because, of course, it was all his fault. And I needed to go into the world and do my thing and be whatever it was I was going to be. So off I trotted to Australia, and I went to a conference and had this wonderful time, and came back and happened to go to the house to visit because the kids were home from the city. And the first thing I did was open the kitchen cupboard. and it was all organized. And I couldn't believe it. He had the cans lined up, and he had the jars lined up, and he had them classified according to this is where the vegetables were, and this is where the fruits were, and this is where the jam was. And I looked at it, and I thought, oh my gosh, I never did this. And then I went and peeked in his bedroom closet, and he had all his clothes organized, not in the way I did anything. And I realized in that moment, oh my goodness, I've driven this man crazy. This isn't about him. This is a lot about me. And that was the beginning to look from a totally different viewing place at my contribution to the breakdown in that relationship. And over the next few months, I came from an observational place rather than a judgmental place, that it was all about him. And we still didn't live together, but I observed over time that this is about me. This is about changing my viewpoint. And I saw a book that a fellow had written. I never read the book. It was just the title that got me, and it said, "Divorce is not the answer." And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Wait a minute here. Like, don't do this. Think again about what's here. Spend some time. Get quiet. And communication was a big part of it. But before the communication and opening it up in a different place, there needed to be a change in the state of mind, in the state of come from that both of us were coming from. And what we did is we snuck away and went away for 6 days and had a quiet time where there were no interruptions, where we were just able to be together. And it completely changed our relationship. We didn't get divorced. We've now been married for 48 years. And I guess I'd have to say I love him more now than I ever have. And it's more gentle, it's kind, it's loving, it's patient. And every morning when I wake up, the first thing I do is I look over at him to see if he's still breathing. And if the sheets are going up and down, I think, aren't we lucky we have another day together? So that was from inside, from a change in thinking that produced different feelings. And it's created a brand new life for us out of what was our life already, but it just changed it entirely. So it's proof in the pudding for me that it's our state of mind that makes a difference. A gentle, calm mind brings new feelings.
That's just so beautiful, Barb. I'm really touched by that story. Do you think that's possible for everyone to have such a great relationship?
I think that there's certainly circumstances for people where there are abusive relationships that, maybe it's just not okay to be with somebody that's being abusive. But I've also seen relationships where people have taken time to look at it in a different way and to have come back together, and the abuse has disappeared because of the change in state of mind. But that, I think in the big picture and in the world of possibility, yeah, I do think it's possible. Is it necessarily possible all the time? No. I think it's something that we can hold as I know it's possible. It's happened in my life. I know it's possible. I saw it happen in my mother-in-law's life in an abusive relationship. So yes, it is possible.
I know when we were speaking a couple of weeks ago, you were telling me that you noticed that you met up with some of your friends who also were introduced to this understanding, and all of you have been married for an extremely long amount of time, and you noticed that was unusual.
we live in a community. We moved to this community about 40 years ago, and there were a number of other people that we became friendly with, and we shared this, our understanding of how we were viewing life, and we've remained friends over the years. Some moved away and have come back here to retire, and there happened to be a dinner at the local Chinese restaurant, and there were 17 of us at the table, 8 couples and one chap who had recently become widowed. And every single person sitting at that table had been married for over 40 years. And then I looked further in the other direction and looked at other people I know, because it's a small place where I live. And I didn't see that at other tables. I saw people that had been married 2 and 3 and 4 times. And it just struck me how incredibly fortunate that we had been to find something and to be able to share it with our friends, an understanding that it could make a difference where we came from, inside ourselves. And I guess we've been really supportive of one another in terms of when we got into a rough patch or we were starting to judge the other person in the relationship, we could talk to those friends and they would say, oh, gee, you might want to take another look at that. Or they would just listen and allow us to be our own mirror. Because when you talk and you are prepared to listen to yourself, it's like you're looking in a mirror and it bounces back and you can go, oh, wait, hold on a minute. I just heard what I said. I can shift that. That's my thinking. I can shift that. Or it just shifts and you move to a new place, a new state of mind.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. It does. And it's one of the reasons why I created this podcast, was because a lot of the state of mind experts that I had met, they all seemed to be in similar sort of things, married for decades. And not only had they been married for decades, because, you know, that it's not unusual to see people married for a long time, but what I found was unusual is people saying statements like, I'm really grateful for him or her, I love them more now than I ever have done. And to see couples who have been together for that amount of time looking at each other like they were teenagers. And it was the sort of thing that I had seen, you know, in movies and that is talked about. And I had got to the stage where I thought, well, that's just make-believe, it's not real. And relationships are about hard work and compromise and this big serious thing. And yet I'd found amongst these state of mind experts that it really didn't seem to be the case amongst them. And I thought this was very unusual. And it sounds simplistic that it just simply is state of mind that helps people have better relationships. Is it any more complicated than that?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, we can make it complicated if we want to, but it isn't. And what I found, and I mean, I'm no saint. I go in and out of it and forget, and then luckily come back to a healthier place and can view the world in a better place. But what I've noticed over the years, and what I noticed with a couple of people that I know very well, is that they build a garbage pile of thoughts. And I think of someone that I know who has a long-standing, I'd have to call it a hate, on for her brother. And this has gone on for 25 years, and he has the same hate in return. And they've just built this big garbage pile of thoughts about what the other person did wrong. And to keep it going and keep it going. And sitting on the outside, I watch it, and they're 2 people that I love very much. And I think if you could just stop looking at that garbage pile and realize that there's another place that you can go to and begin again, because the garbage pile is only in our head. It really only exists in thought. It's past, it's gone, it's over. And we only hold on to it by our own doing. And so we have the choice to let it go, too.
Yeah, I wonder how many relationships, not just romantic relationships, but work relationships or kind of friendships where we innocently do that, where we remember, well, I remember when that person did this, and then another time they did that, and we build up this evidence to support of our judgment or our belief around them.
Yeah. And I think you just used a really important word, and it was the word innocence, because nobody does that on purpose. None of us do that to be hurtful. It just is, I guess it's some kind of thing we do as human nature, and we do it in our innocence. And then when we see it, it gives us another opportunity to do something different. But it is in innocence.
That's a really nice segue into, I wanted to talk a little bit about education and children, because I know that's a lot of your background. And I guess we see the innocence in children when children act out. It's easier sometimes to see that in them, that they don't know better. What's your experience been with having this understanding and how your approach has been to education, which may be different to mainstream education, or is it different? Is it exactly the same?
It's really, again, from the place you're viewing it from. And, with kids and with adults, with anybody, it's to see that place inside them that is the golden place. That place where they are innocent, where they've added a garbage pile. Adults have bigger garbage piles, and it creates all sorts of things. And we have criminals in the world, and all sorts of bad things do happen. But deep inside, somewhere in everyone, there's that kernel of goodness. And that's the place that I always have tried to look for in kids in school, because that's their place of innocence. It's their place of wholeness. And when you look at that, you have a far greater opportunity for them to give back from a higher state of mind than when you're looking at them as being the bad little kid.
It's interesting because I was reading recently, there's some debate around, in the UK at least, I was reading the newspapers around how to approach children, what's the best way to educate them. And I know some years ago there was some study done saying that, if you're very positive and uplifting towards children, then they tend to perform better. And recently I read something from someone who said, well, no, you need to be realistic with children, and some children aren't good at this and they're not good at that, and therefore you need to be really, really honest with them and tell them some harsh truths, that not everyone can become first in sports day, and not everyone's going to be successful in their career. What's your take on it? Because it sounds like you're not taking that approach, and it's a much nicer environment, should I say?
I think the word that I would use rather than honest is to be authentic. And it's true, not everybody's going to be the top athlete, but recognizing a person's talents and skills and acknowledging that and being authentic with them, instead of, I think of the little kid in school. Let's say they're they're 6 or 7, and you come up to them and say, "Oh, you've done such a lovely job of that, and I think that's wonderful." And then the teacher goes off and says, "Oh, I wish you'd learn how to print." It's not authentic. And the child knows that. They sense that. So if you're authentic and honest with them, and you acknowledge them for what they're doing and doing well, that's a whole different thing than false praise. It's a different come from. It's not making up positive, happy thoughts and laying them on. It's coming from a genuine place inside, and that's why it goes back to the person who's the helper. It goes back to the teacher, if it's in a teaching relationship with children. It goes back to us if we're in a human relationship with a spouse or with our children. It all comes from an authentic and genuine place inside ourselves, not a made-up positive, find all the icky, gooey words that you can think of that make you sound sweet as sugar.
So what's your view on discipline? And again, that's something that's very topical. I've got a number of friends who are having children now, and I've seen over the last 30 years in my lifetime that the approach to, in the UK, kind of corporal punishment and going before that and hitting your kids and disciplining your kids has drastically changed. And I think in general for the better. But what's your view on that? In terms of discipline and bringing up children so they aren't spoilt, and at the same time we are really nurturing them.
I think that the kids need to learn, and part of their learning is, I don't know, I can't think of a word off the top of my head to use, but holding them to account for what they've done. And I mean, it's not okay to do some things, and so there's nothing wrong with having that conversation, but you don't need to scream and yell at them. I think of, I'll give you an example of, oftentimes kids will get into interactions with one another on the playground because that's a time when they're unsupervised, and there's a playground supervisor, but there's not somebody there every second. And so after lunch, I would have a couple of kids come into my office, and they will have had a scrap of some kind. Maybe fists were involved. So I would get them to put their hands over their hearts, and their little hearts are beating like crazy. And I'd say, so what's happening to your body right now? My heart's beating really, really fast. I'm really mad. And so I'd say, well, then let's settle down. Let's wait until you settle down, and then we're going to talk about it. And then I would wait, get them to feel their heart again, because it was an indicator, physical indicator, that their body could calm down. And when they were calmed down, I'd get them to talk about what had happened. And they would invariably end up apologizing to each other without me telling them to or asking them to, and going off and playing together. And I think that's an example with young children. I think it can happen with anybody. We hold people to account. We ask them to figure something out, and they do if we trust them to.
Yeah, it really links nicely to what you said before about communication, isn't it? It's not about what we do.
Yeah.
It's really taking into account the state of mind first. So if you're not in a clear state of mind and you just communicate, you're going to end up with more arguments and
yeah, because what did Einstein say about you can't solve a problem from the same place that created it? That's not quite the right way he said it, but that's the gist of it. That if your state of mind is such that you're in such a state of anger, you're not going to solve anything in that place. You need to go to a different place, a different state of mind, and go back to the essence, which is inside. It's a feeling. It's going back to knowing that your thoughts are creating feelings that are inappropriate if they're really, really angry, and that if you settle yourself down, you can come from a better place. Then the communication's much better.
Which makes me think about, if anyone who's listening to this is frustrated or upset with their kids or with their spouse or with their friends, what you're really pointing them to is just settle down first.
Yeah.
And then try and approach the issue.
And chill out. Just chill out. And go for a walk. Take some time. Go into another room. Just take a bit of time. And if you can't do that, my mother used to go into the bathroom, shut the door, and take some time. And then she would compose herself and then come back, and it was a whole different thing. You just shift.
Yeah. I love hearing stories from people's own lives for the interview. So, you shared a story earlier on Do you have any stories from your teaching profession about state of mind and anything that was particularly impactful that you'd like to share with us about how state of mind maybe helped you deal with a situation with a particular child or with a teacher? Or
I can tell you a story about one that comes to mind is the change in state of mind of a child. And this child was new to my school, and he had been abandoned by two mothers. First off, his birth mother had given him up for adoption when he was a few months old, and his adoptive mother had walked out on the family and left him. And this is a little boy that he, if they were labeling it, we call it attachment disorder. He could not come inside the school, and yet his parents knew that he needed to make that connection, and he's probably one of the most damaged children that I had ever come across in my years. And so he would come to my office window. So I thought, well, that's the best we've got so far, so we'll start there. So I would go to the library and get books, and he'd come and tap on my window. I'd open the window, and we'd have a conversation. And the first lessons that I ever taught him were through that window. And I'd give him some books from the library, and off he'd go. And a few days later, he'd come back and tap on the window. And this happened over a year. And I wondered if he would ever come inside the building. And one day he came in, and he came to my office door, and he said, "My body tells me when it's safe and when it's not safe. Now it's safe. I can stay." And that was such an example of how this child's fear and his thoughts shifted, and it gave him, by us being patient with him, the opportunity to shift and change. Well, he then went on to be a regular participant, came to class every day. And not to say that his struggles were over in his life, because they weren't. But to go from not being able to enter a building and only being able to talk through the window to being able to sit in a classroom all day was an enormous shift in his thinking about and his feeling about where he could be safe. That's the one that always comes straight to mind when I think about kids, and troubled kids. And from the point of view of the teachers and me as the principal, it was to see his wholeness, not see his all the pathology that he was presenting, because there was a lot of it. But somewhere deep inside, there was a place where that child could find safety and home, and we just had to keep acknowledging that and create the open space for that to happen. And it did.
I talk sometimes to people about a different level of communication from what I've learned in the last few years, and it really ties into what you said, which is talking to people's wholeness, talking to the part of them that isn't upset with you or frustrated or angry or insecure or shy or whatever else. Because I believe that there is a part of everyone that is whole, that is complete, that and this might sound a bit woo-woo, but kind of it's almost as we're talking on a deeper level, beyond just our intellect. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're pointing to when you're talking to this child? Yeah, absolutely. And looking to the things that were his strengths and recognizing them in an authentic way. I think that particular child had been told by many people around him, from all well-meaning, that he was really great at doing things that he knew he wasn't really great at. And so that goes back to your question before about authenticity, and are you giving them, are you telling them the truth? Are you being honest with them? But if you're being authentic with them and recognizing that which they have that they're offering forth,
then you're recognizing that essence in them. And this particular child, he could run like a deer. He was like an antelope. You know how an antelope kind of lifts up in the air and then puts their feet down, and they just have this flow to how their body moves. And I would watch him run across the field toward his home, and he ran like that. And I had an opportunity to see him swim, and he swam like an otter. And so when I would say those things to him, he knew that I knew that piece of him that was true and authentic, and that built trust. And in building that trust, it was authentic and built on a firm foundation of recognizing in him the essence of beauty. And then he found that in me, and we matched up there. I think that's what you do. You match up, and it's in a place that you almost can't describe. I think that's why I called my book I know it's why I called my book The Essential Curriculum, because out of that word essential is essence. It's that undescribable, indescribable place that's in people. But it's so powerful.
We couldn't have planned that better, because my next question was going to be about the book, so I'm glad we're connected and on the same page as well. I've been reading your book, and it's really just, it's a slim book. It's very down to earth and practical and full of common sense. And I believe you wrote this after working in a school as a guide for teachers, or a future kind of head teacher coming into that school. But I find that it's just full of real common sense ideas, practical ideas for any kind of relationship. Mm-hmm. And were you aware of that when you were writing the book, or did it become more apparent after you wrote it?
It became really apparent after I wrote it, but I'll just tell you how I came about writing it. I had retired as a head teacher, and there was an emergency in one of the schools. A principal became ill, and they needed someone to step in. So the superintendent called and said, "I need you to come, and I need you to be there tomorrow." And I thought I'd be there for a couple of days. Well, it turned into an 8-month experience. And so I had wanted to write, and that was part of my intention in retiring. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do so that I can make sure that I can do that as well? So I imagined myself doing this job and speaking to a brand new head teacher that had never had any experience. So at the end of every day, I sat down and I wrote down, I kept a journal, and I wrote down incidents that happened during the day. And if I had I was mentoring somebody, what I would tell them about that. And I discovered, I wrote that down, and then I went away for a weekend to put it all together. And I thought, well, this could be anywhere. I could be sitting at my husband's business and saying exactly the same thing. Or I could be at the chemist where my daughter works and say exactly the same thing. Or anywhere, because it's all the same. It's about the essence that we have inside us and sharing that with other people and noticing our come from so that we do the best we can in life. And it does come from that place that's very formless inside us.
Yeah, your book's called The Essential Curriculum, 21 Ideas for Developing a Positive and Optimistic Culture. And whilst you do mention schools and teaching in there, there's just so much that I look back at my corporate career and think how relevant that was. So I highly recommend that. I highly recommend the book to everyone.
I've noticed that it's applicable right across the board, and I'm a volunteer chairperson of the board of a complex care home, and I've started to give the book out to different people in that care home that are leaders in that place, because it's exactly the same thing. It's about inviting people to the table, listening to their opinions, being respectful, finding places to connect, so that you connect in a place that benefits everybody. And when the state of mind is such that people are on the same wavelength, you just feel the culture of the place changes, and you feel the atmosphere and the energy changes around you. it's really quite remarkable. And every time I get to observe it, I'm awed by it and grateful at the same time.
Well, Barb, it's been fantastic having you on the podcast today, and we've pretty much run out of time. Is there anything else that you haven't talked about that you wanted to get across to people, or what's the one thing you want people to leave with from listening to your interview to have better relationships in their own life?
That we all have that capacity, and that gratitude is the grease for the wheels, and to be open to that and to slow ourselves down a bit so that we can find that sense of gratitude and look at the world in that way, and it makes a huge difference. And I wish everybody luck. It's a wonderful world.
Thank you. If anyone wanted to get hold of you, how might they do that if they wanted to contact you?
They could go to my website, www.awakeningschools, with an S on the end, .com. And there's an address there, which I can't remember at this exact moment what my Gmail address is. I'm sorry.
No problem. If people want to get hold of me, they can do so via my website, which is ankushjain.co.uk, via Facebook, which is facebook.com/AnkushJainLTD, and via Twitter, which is @AnkushKJain. Thanks, Barb, for joining us on the podcast today, and I'll speak to the listeners next time. This was the Relationship Series podcast. If you like this episode, please share it and leave us your feedback online. Thanks for listening.